All right. Yeah. Well, loreleila. Loreleila. After all this time, I just still can't settle down on pronunciation. Okay. All of my friends, whenever I bring up stuff like this, are, including psychologist friends, are all like, no. Like, I thought Asperger's. I'm like, I notice I have Asperger's symptoms. And it's sort of the same as everything else. I just think I'm really introspective and I see these kind of symptoms that I have in my own proportions, but that everybody could notice if they were introspective enough. But then with Asperger's was another case where I'm like, wait a second. I mean, and it told me I was probably unconsciously or subconsciously self-diagnosing over these years, and I embraced that. It's like, yeah, maybe I have one of these things, whatever. I'm interested in the subject. But Asperger's, it's like, I'm a programmer. I mean, they should call that geek burgers or something. I mean, the programming industry and culture is dominated, by these kinds of behaviors and thoughts and feelings that are that are considered those kinds of symptoms. It was always, even before I heard about Asperger's, it was clear to me that autism gradiated up all the way into functional and indiscernible. And still present in those people could discern it, but like undiagnosable and not a threat to functioning, so not the subject of the study. Let's see, my glasses, these are just cheap glasses. I buy them cheap. Okay, and I don't really need them now, actually. But, so anyway, so I'm used to people going, no, I've sent people, and they deal with people that really have this as a problem, and they see the distinction, and that's fine. But I wonder how easy it is to tell the difference. And in the schizophrenic stuff, I'm just saying, like, younger periods, I literally had to work hard to overcome certain, like, symbolic fixations that things meant certain things, and how people reacted to hearing an idea, and just all sorts of fate turning together. I was totally investigating is life just a dream, and maybe you can imagine, and you could be like a Neo-type experience. And I could also say, well, I never really took it seriously because I love science from the time I was 8, so I always have these parallel thoughts. It's like, well, what if? Like I love science fiction to a lesser degree, all speculative fiction and fantasy, and so I can always say, well, I'm going to consider that as if, what if I write a story about it? How realistic can I make it? And but all of these fears borrow from each other, so that kind of compartmentalization ultimately is just a gimmick. I have to admit, it's probably best to tell me I don't actually have this, and it's sort of a win-win for me, because on the one hand, if I have it, it's not that it would be a good thing to become schizophrenic, but if I already am, and I'm okay with what I managed to do with it, and if that's why I'm so able to see my own train of thought, then I guess I'm okay with that. I lucked out and used that to my advantage. And maybe I would be too proud of something that really is an affliction. I have great compassion for this as an affliction, but I think some of what I'm thinking here helps solve it. It's like there's ways to deal with the stream of thoughts. It doesn't have to be 99% reliable, or even just anything over 50% reliable can be good. The other win is that, okay, no, of course not, and but I've had these experiences, and I would like to discuss how similar they are. Not that I'm actually having the schizophrenic version of them, but I have had objects and voices from things. I've had disembodied voices. I think I've been introspective fine, but I didn't just imagine them, in the sense that I didn't invent them ahead of time. I experienced them. My imagination, this or subconscious, or plural, generates them, or wherever it comes from. So what's the fundamental difference? If I am lost in the city and I hear the radio trying to give me directions, but I know that's my subconscious. I know my mind is going, Jesus, I'm lost, and it's seeking out. And so some of the stupider parts of my mind are like, maybe this noise will, in other words, it's really just distracting me when I perceive it as it's trying to tell me. Part of my brain is going, maybe we'll learn from here, it'll tell you. tells us what time it is in the weather. So, but how, other than I realize the psychology of how it's generated, and then I take that into account. In other words, I have an extra analytic loop on top of a basic emotional symptom. Does everybody have those all the time, every day, and not interpret it, notice it that way? In other words, it's /subconscious. Or am I just dealing with the way I have it? So I think that's a fundamentally interesting question, and granted, I want to overemphasize the part of, yeah, maybe I'm a functional schizophrenic, because I think that makes the question balanced and interesting. So there's just a little bit of presentation to that, because, I know it's not going to turn out that way. These kinds of things do have definitions based on behavior and practicality, and I'm not here to say that I'm in the same situation as someone that's suffering, interruptions and affects on their life that are tragic affects on their life that aren't strictly necessary due to real symptoms, overwhelming symptoms. And my base philosophy is just that as far as to convince myself, I've seen that this is how the mind works, and they're just having less of the unconscious / subconscious filtering. And I think it relates to this issue of inhibition. I was born in 1967. I think I bought hook, line, and sinker, though I'm not as hedonistic as the 70s compared to people in other eras. Maybe I even am, and I definitely do not believe in inhibition. Now, I've come in my maturity to appreciate it, like many other things, as something that of course is a good reason that we have the ability to inhibit ourselves. Sometimes we judge, hey, I haven't figured out a nice going with the flow way to address that behavior, but I am strong enough to inhibit it. Great. But I still think it's kind of like a hammer, like a tool. Yeah, it's a little brute force, and the old metaphor of if all you have is a hammer, it makes you a bit of a brute. You're not a fine-tuned tool user or maker if all you have is a hammer, and that's kind of what inhibition is like. So what if? Uninhibited people, often you could just say, well, no, they just lack the ability to be inhibited. Who knows what the range of that is? So I think that's all provoked in this question. All right, and I hope everybody did get the link and saw Curious's video. Fascinating story, lots of elements. This is just a tangent from that, a little bit of an abstraction. It's an interesting story at every level, I think, personal, spiritual, psychology from the inside. I also think it's a great example of what I was saying about how the real truth does not come from declarative statements, and it comes from an honest reporting of experiences. Those are the deeper truths. So, Curious didn't really make declarative statements overall. You could probably pick them out, of course, but and yet truthful. Is full of truth, I think, what I would call truth. All right. Cheers.